Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome you once again on Wednesday nights with myself, Inayet Wadee, on this rather chilly Wednesday evening, I must add. As we welcome our listeners, our viewers on Salam Media, on the various platforms, on the YouTube channel, and also on the social media platforms of Salam Media this evening. Now, there are a number of issues that we are going to be focusing on tonight, and for the next hour, we are going to be focusing on something which is of major concern to all of us as consumers. And we are talking about food prices now coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we know what that has done to the economy, and then straight into the problems that the country has actually been faced with, whether we're looking at ESCOM, load shedding, looking at the petrol price with some of the external factors like the Russia-Ukraine war that has been playing out. And all of that, at the end of the day, has contributed even further to the desperate situation that we find ourselves in this country as an economy at large. And because of all these factors, we have been hit with increase after increase, price increases like we cannot believe. Now, there are many questions that have been raised, and the South African Competition Commission has also taken note of these sharp increases in staple foods and saying that the consumers are at risk of price gouging by retailers. Now, how often have we seen this where when there is an increase and you'll find that these increases are justified as a result of all the contributing factors that I spoke about. But there are times when there is relief, when oil prices go down, when there are other forms of relief, and these things don't come down. We know South Africans are in a desperate situation as we speak right now. Many people are going hungry. Many people are living on bare necessities. There are those who have actually cut down on luxuries, and also those that are starving, those that are going hungry. And also, when one looks at some of the staple foods, people are actually buying these foods on credit because they don't have the money. Now, this is the level of desperation we see in this country. And this is the reason why we are talking with Imraahn Mukaddam this evening. He's the head of Inspire Media Networks, and also he's been popularly known during the time when as the bread price champion. And we've also got Abeedah Adams with the People's Coalition with us this evening. And it's time now to welcome both our guests to the show. And we do appreciate both of them taking time out and joining us. So to Imraahn Mukaddam and Abeedah Adams, we're just waiting for you to appear on the screen and to welcome you to the show. I see Abeedah's coming on. And Abeedah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Walaikum salam, and thanks for inviting me. I must
Yes,
just
and we
say
do.
that unfortunately I can't stay for the full hour. I've got another very pressing commitment.
Okay,
So
not a problem.
yeah.
So how long are you
I
able
said
to
I've
stay
got
with us,
about
Abeedah?
25 minutes.
That's perfect. I'm sure Imran and I can continue with the rest
Yeah.
of the broadcast as well. Imran, assalamu alaikum to you, and as always, welcome.
Walaikum salam, Brother Inayet, and to the listeners of Salam Media.
Yes. Now, Abeedah, because you've got limited time, I'd like to actually begin with you and looking at where we are at this point in time, looking at the People's Coalition as well, because when we see the economy, when we look at consumers, there are real people that are affected. And also looking at what the Competition Commission has taken note of, talking about the risk of price gouging by retailers and what this is actually doing. If you could just paint us a picture on the ground as to, what are your observations? What do you see? What are people actually going through as a result of all these price hikes?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Inayat. I just want to make a small clarification. The People's Coalition is not that active anymore, but I am working for a trade union, the General Industries Workers Union in South Africa. And I mean, I'm still very active in community organizations. And I just want to say, for example, that the majority of our members are very precarious workers. So a very direct link to this exponential price hikes in the is not reflected, for example, in our members' salaries across the board in terms of wage negotiations. I mean, if you look now what the public sector government is offering 2%. I mean, even I'm sitting with employees who's either still claiming COVID and they're not making money. So taking probably the lead from government offering between 3 and 6% increases. I mean, offering that kind of increases. So workers and the poor and the working class are not coping at all. I've seen a few of the headlines over my timeline, etc., and I tried to do some research. And one of the realities is that the food prices has been going up, but it takes very long to come down, even if there's changes in prices. And we know that even the Competition Commission is, for example, in their latest research report, for example, they were focusing on I think two areas. Is the issue about um, the price of oil and bread. And although there were significant price drops, that was not passed on to the consumer, for example. If we look in a South African context, that the minimum wage of workers is what? It's 23 Rand 19 an hour. If I just can be allowed to share some stats with you. So that means that um, some workers, if they work at 20, who earns 23 Rand 19, they, for example, earn 4,881 Rand. But yet the average price for a food basket, for example, is 4,778 Rand. Then, if you look, for example, at the grant, we've been campaigning for a basic income grant, and this is one of the reasons we are people are experiencing hunger, not just in rural communities, but even in urban communities. And we know that, for example, a basic income grant of 1,500 would go a long way to alleviate the crisis that we have. I mean, can you imagine that you get a SRD grant of 350, but yet the a food basket is way above that 350. So of course we have a crisis. People are actually going hungry. But I think one of the key things is the fact, even when COVID started, if you may recall, they were already concerns then about price gouging. But I think what is very frustrating, for example, for the ordinary person and the working class person there in the street, is that the work of the Competition Commission takes extremely long. I mean, they do the research, and eventually, when they do have findings against retail, etc. It's a slap on the wrist. And how does that one then go back? Because if families and children and people have been hungry for 4 months, there's no redress that they experience. Despite that, you might then have the producer or the retailer be given a fine. So I think there's a really an urgent need, for example, for us to have. I'm not an economist, but I think that we need to have some price controls on, for example, on a basic food basket. And I know Imran has done a lot of work in campaigning, especially around the bread cartels and what has happened there in the past. But it seems it's not limited to that. I mean, I've just been looking in terms of food prices. If you think since CPI has increased in from June to July from 7.4 to 7.8, 7.9%. But the prices of food, of basic food, for example, if you look at maize meal, I think the price has increased with 30%. So there's a exponential increase, but that is not reflected even in poor people. I mean, let alone people who's receiving a grant or no income. Even working people are not able to cope, especially if you think that the majority of the workers are earning very, very low. The last stats released that I think what 58 70% of workers earn below 5,800 rand. A food basket is about 4,800 rand. So where does the other living expenses, how is it covered? So I think there's a real crisis. Not I think we are confronted with a real crisis at the moment.
Well, Imran, as Abeedah says, we are confronted with a real crisis, and we are in a serious crisis situation. And in the past, we had organizations like the consumer councils But the key issue here is to look at consumer activism, because at this point in time, this is clear that this is not sustainable at all. We're talking about retailers. We're talking about monopolies that are operating within the retail space, and particularly when we are talking about basic foods. We're not talking about luxuries. We're talking about basic foods like bread. We're talking about basic essentials like, for instance, maize and oil.
Yeah, the situation is dire, and we work on the ground. As Inspire Network, we are assisting about food to feeding schemes in the Elsies River area. So we on the ground and we see the impact of our current condition with this ridiculously high unemployment. So we're talking on the one hand the working class, but when we're talking about the unemployed poor, what Abeedah said about the 350 rand is actually an insult. To expect a family to an unemployed person to feed himself and his family with 350 rand. Similar with the grant systems, you find with pensions and disability grants, actually having to maintain families. Old people are maintaining the entire families, so it's becoming what we're seeing as well, especially what we're doing when we're feeding, is we're actually busy with the children's right to food campaign, and we're looking at doing a survey on children, especially children under the age of 10, and just looking at how many meals they are skipping a, a week, or how many times a week they're getting a decent meal, and where they're getting those meals from. So the impact of this situation, the economic situation, as well as the way that is profiteering. A lot of these big companies made more money during COVID than they do under normal economic circumstances, uh, in basic food even. So we have to look at um, putting a cap on profit on basic foodstuffs as an intervention right now. We have to look at how uh, government can put in a measure of price controls, or have a system of relief, like they have in other countries, where they have food vouchers for the poor, where they have specific discount for certain categories of citizens. We have to look at alternatives. But really, right now, the hunger amongst the urban poor is becoming frightening. It's becoming frightening.
Yes, Imran. And also, Abida, from what Imran mentions, talking about the government and government international interventions. Does the government truly realize, or have they come to grips, or have they come to terms with what people on the ground are actually experiencing, with what workers are experiencing? Because Imran is talking about profiteering, which is immoral on many an occasion. It is actually insane when Imran says that during a crisis period like COVID, for instance, some of them have actually made more money than what they've ever done before, earned before.
Look, I think the government, there's no political will. I mean, like the ANC is confronted by these factionalism and the different faction fightings. If you, for example, think in the public sector unions are negotiating, or they started the process of negotiations, I think, in April already. Government has now given them 3 weeks to decide to accept, I think, a 2% increase for public sector workers, which is an insult if you look at even the CPI now for this. It's increased again. It's now at 7.9%. Yet at the same time, a few months ago, salary increases of 3% was awarded for, I think, the judiciary and members of parliament, etc., etc. Now, we might say that 3%, that is not a lot of money. That has been backdated to last year, I think April 2021. And 3% of a MP salary, which is 100,000 a month, is way more than 3% for 2% that they want to offer workers. So there's no real increase. I mean, government is telling us austerity, austerity all over, but yet they are making it easy for big business and for companies to profiteer. And I think the other thing that we are confronted with South Africa, that poverty in South Africa, because of historical reasons, it's racialized. And it's majority black people, and then also it's also very gendered, and it's women, because if you look at the unemployment stats, I think 70% of young people between the ages of 18 and 24, and about 58% of black working class women who's unemployed. So who's most affected by these issues? Because then when I go to the shop, they don't say to me, "Oh, you are poor, you haven't received a salary increase, or you are on what is this, SRD grant, you're only earning 350, you only get that 350 rand a month, so I'm going to allow you to pay 10 rand for that loaf of bread." And then when Abeedah comes, she's working and she got a nice increase. She's fairly okay. She's middle class. So yes, she can pay 18, 16 rand. We all have to pay the same. And it's not just the prices of food that has gone. I mean, like fuel has increased, tariffs has increased, our rates, our waters, our electricity. So people are going hungry. They also, their water is being disconnected. They don't have electricity. That is compounded even by now. We have such a cold winter, and here in the city of Cape Town, that communities are confronted with evictions. That is what the city of Cape Town is doing. And so, when we look at all these things together and you put it in one basket, it's still the working class, it's still the poor, and it's still black people who's paying for all these crises. So it's not just one thing, it's all these things together then that, and I have to eke out a living, and then I have to struggle to survive. And people are really desperate. I think a lot of people are surviving on one meal a day if they are lucky. And I mean, I think Imran has got way more experience in that in terms of the soup kitchens. I've just seen from anecdotal evidence that the queues and the lines have is longer. For example, in where I live in Westgate, we have noticed a pickup in terms of the number of people who's coming to knock on the door for food, and it's not just what we would call the regulars that we are used to in the area. I've seen an influx of new faces. Even myself, when I go and buy my food, I've been reading. Things have changed a little and it's stabilized. For example, if you look at the price of sunflower of oil, of cooking oil. And so I'd expected for that price to reduce more, and it's not happening. And I've seen, for example, that not all the reduction in prices is passed on to us as the consumers. And that, for me, I think is criminal. But part of the problem is when the Competition Commission do then find these companies and these producers, it seems like a slap on the wrist. If you, for example, can recall that Discam was also found guilty during the height of COVID in terms of the price gouging with the selling of the face masks that we were all required to wear. But it's not that Discam is now out of business so that it can actually teach a lesson for other big business. I think that they actually factor in these kinds of fines in their business model from the Competition Commission. And that is a real problem, because it's almost, for me, it seems like, as a poor person, that, the Competition Commission is really a kind of a toothless body, because I never really experience genuinely when they do um, issue these fines to these companies and etc. So that I don't know what the solutions are, but those are the issues that we really need to look at, and how are we going to address that?
Yes, Abeedah. In fact, I just like Imran's thoughts on the Competitions Commission. As Abeedah mentioned, toothless body, and I'm sure, Imran, you've been monitoring the situation. You've been taking a closer look at an institution like the Competitions Commission.
Yeah. I think the Competition Commission, really, as Abida says, it is a toothless tiger. It really doesn't have um, any impact with regards to reversing the damage done. So in terms of that, it's always the poor and those consumers most affected, that have no recourse. So it's easy for a company to pay the fine and then increase, um, gradually, and recoup that money that they lost there. But it's not easy for the poor to make up for the meals they lose. Remember,
Yes, I think Imran is just frozen a bit, Abida. I know you've got about 5 or 6 minutes with us. So I think by the time we do get Imran back, I just need your thoughts on consumer activism. And I know you've obviously been involved with the people on the ground, and also through unions and workers as well. And just in terms of what can be done, what needs to be done, because we're talking about a competitions commission that is toothless. We're talking about a government that doesn't seem to care. We are talking about mega business. We're talking about corporates. We're talking about those that have got vested interests. We're talking about all this insane profiteering that is taking place. What needs to be done?
Yeah, I think, actually, if you may recall, just about a week ago, that the two biggest trade union federations actually took to the streets. And part of their campaigning was actually the increasing cost of living and how it is affecting their members, but also the unemployed people and poor and working class communities. And we don't, I mean, I think it's a problem that we don't really have that kind of consumer culture. But I think it's important for communities to join these trade unions and these federations in terms of their campaigning to say to government, actually, enough is enough. We cannot actually afford the cost of living. I mean, given our historical and our past imbalances and the redress in the past, so we might have what they would call the most progressive constitution in the world, but really, when it comes to the issue and the face of poverty, it is still black, it is still predominantly black women, and it's still working class women. So as communities and as workers and the unemployed, we actually need to join hands and to fight the struggle together and support the trade union federations with their current campaign, for example, around the issues of the cost of living. Because even as you said earlier on, and we've all been saying, even people who's working, they cannot afford the increases and the runaway prices and what is happening with inflation. But that is not so. I mean, for me, what I don't understand, especially if you look in terms of the manufacturing industry, it's not as if wages is pushing up the prices, because I know that the war in Ukraine and Russia is contributing a bit to it. But if you look in terms of our reality, our members are not getting big increases. In fact, sometimes they're not even getting increases for maybe a year or 18 months, because COVID was used and now it's the war again. So what is then pushing these prices up? Because I think it's just profiteering at the expense of of poor people, and that is something that not just communities can fight alone, and not just organized labor can fight alone. Alone, it is something that we actually need to join hands. And if it means that we need to go out in the streets in our hundreds and our thousands and occupy government, because clearly government is not listening, they are more obsessed and worried about all the dollars that was in the matters or not in the matters. I mean, I watched TV last night when the president, for example, had to account for that saga, and it's really, I mean, and they call honorable this and honorable that, but it's complete dishonor and the lack of seriousness in terms of what our supposed public representatives have to take serious. They are not taking issues of what poor people are confronted with as of a serious nature.
Well, Abeedah, I know you need to leave us, but we do appreciate you taking time out, spending the last 25 minutes with us. We appreciate your time, and inshallah, looking forward to further discussions on these particular issues. And for now, we wish you well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam, and shukran for having me again.
Well, Abeedah Adams, unfortunately, she's got to leave. She's got another engagement. But Imran, just to continue, and the point that I was raising with Abeedah as well is, when one unpacks what we are discussing, there are just so many factors. On the one hand, we've got government, we've got corporates, we've got big business with vested interests, we've got government that have got vested interests as well, and also at the same time, we're looking at people like yourself and myself, people on the ground that are trying to survive. And the key issue here is I coined the term consumer activism. And this is something that we see in certain other parts of the world, where we've seen, or the Occupy movement, because, we've seen this in the past where forcing the hands of government, forcing the hands of retailers to actually do something and to recognize the plight of people, but also at the same time to create this awareness that what you are doing is criminal. You're pushing prices up at will, but when it comes down, it's taking a long time to slow down. And at the end of the day, all these benefits are not being passed to the consumer.
Yeah, I think the a problem that we have in South Africa is that we've got a very complacent consumer culture. So um, we have people on the streets protesting and being angry, but they're not sending the right message that they are angry because they are hungry. They are saying we are angry because we are hungry.
Yes, I think we are having a bit of a problem as far as Imran is concerned. Possibly we'll have to try and get hold of Imran or on audio. Imran, are you
Can
back
I?
with us?
Yeah, well, I think there's a problem with my line. Um, the issue that I'm saying is that there's a lot of anger in our society in South Africa, but the anger is misdirected because the anger comes out of hunger, and so we don't have consumers um, ever really going to the street about the price of bread, but they'll go to the streets if they don't like a councillor or if there's political factioneering. So the anger is being manipulated by politicians and redirected away from the real problem. And the real problem is that we have abject poverty in a country that is supposed to be the richest country on this continent. We have a well developed economy, but our people are going hungry. You go into any supermarket, the food is stocked from the floor to the roof, but nobody can afford it. Or the poor can't afford to go into. They can't live with what they need, and this is the issue. And South Africa still remains the most unequal society in the world, according to the Gini coefficient. So we have real systemic and structural issues, and the topics we're discussing about price gouging and price fixing and market monopolies and government intervention, all of those are indications of a systemic problem. And the systemic problem is that we haven't really addressed the the system that is exploitative to the extent that we don't have a economic system that allows for equal opportunity in the market and creating the jobs that is needed. You'll see many of these companies are growing on the balance sheets, but it's jobless growth. If the economy is growing by 6% or 2% or 1%, the unemployment rate is growing faster than what the economy is growing. Every year we're absorbing 900,000 matriculants has to be absorbed into the market. So there's just this bubble is bursting and it's going to burst even more. And we really need to speak to big business. We need to get government and community leaders and stakeholders to start talking about how do we how do we look at um, the, the real lived experience of poor people. And we have a situation now, if we look at Gift of the Givers, where they've basically taken over the role of government in the post KZN, the floods disaster. We look at last year's riots in KZN. That was an indication also of the kind of anger that's happening on the ground. But it's like we have a state that has abdicated their responsibility, and we have a business community that is exploiting the lack of governance from the state. And then we have the issue of xenophobia that is being used as a scapegoat. So a lot of this is also happening now, that is really creating a situation where it's extremely difficult
Yes, I think Imran has frozen again, and essentially what Imran has been saying is we've got a systematic problem in this country, and we're going to try and get hold of Imran back again. Unfortunately, there are issues with regard to the line, so we will try and get Imran back very shortly. But the issues that he has raised, and also in unpacking some of the issues that he speaks about, and he speaks about the systemic problem. He speaks about exploitation, and also how big business has actually been allowed to actually flourish and going unchecked. And also, at the end of the day, what checks and balances does the government have in place as far as monitoring these cartels that are operating, these monopolies that are operating, those that are profiteering. So these are some of the issues that we need to think about very carefully. But what we're going to do is, while we try and get hold of Imraahn Mukaddam on a better line, we're going to go for a quick break, and we'll be back.
Salam Media, humanitarian journalism.
African. Did you know a sponsored water well and borehole allows children to go back to school, empowers communities, and is a means of sadaqah jariyah? There are many villages in Africa and Afghanistan that are in need of water wells and boreholes. Sponsor a water well in Africa at 14,500 rand, or a borehole in Africa and Afghanistan at 49,500 rand. Call Africa Muslims Agency on 011 834 8685 or donate at Africa Muslims Agency. .co.za. Africa Muslims Agency, inspiring the spirit of giving.
There's no smell that takes me back to the comfort of my childhood than the smell of black seed oil being applied by my nani. Now I'm using Tib black seed in my own home to soothe sniffles and coughs, to help with digestion and immunity, and of course, as part of my beauty routine. After all these years, I've come to appreciate the wisdom in finding comfort and shifa in trusted treatments like Tib Black Seed. You can find Tib Black Seed at all leading pharmacies or find out more at blackseed.co.za.
Whoever fasts Ashura, it is as if he has fasted the entire year. And whoever gives charity this day, it is like the charity of an entire year. Donate from only 500 Rand this month of Muharram to any of our campaigns and reap the rewards. Visit our website at www.pennyappeal.org.za to do a quick and easy donation, or visit the site for more information on our Thirst Relief, Orphan Kind, Hifts Orphan, Feed Our World, and the Mosque Project. Penny Appeal. Small change, big difference.
You know, it's a wonder how kids get anything done these days. With all the distractions, when do they even get time to study? As a mother, all I can really do is make sure they have all they need to perform at their best. That's why I choose to include Sunfoil triple refined pure sunflower oil with every meal I make. Naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether I'm cooking, frying, or baking, I know every dish will be a wholesome one. Sunfoil, now we're cooking.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
The time is just gone 7:35 p.m. We continue with our discussion this evening, looking at South Africa, looking at the consumer, and also the Competition Commission expressing their concern and investigating the high cost of food prices, and more importantly, coming down very slowly. And until now, we've had Abeedah Adams, and she's had to leave, but we still have got Imraahn Mukaddam with us, still back with us. Imran, assalamu alaikum to you once again, and welcome back.
Walaikum salam. I'm very sorry about my internet connection that is not stable.
No, it's understandable. It's understandable, Imran. Don't worry about that. Imran, just to continue, and there were a number of issues that you raised, and you spoke about the systematic problem. You spoke about exploitation, and also in terms of government with these monopolies and these cartels going unchecked relatively. Now, you've had this experience with the bread cartels in the past. And just to give us an idea as to how these monopolies and these cartels actually operate, because I'm sure when it comes to the major retailers, when we're talking about even those that are manufacturers of basic foods and basic necessities, I'm sure there is a lot of collusion that is taking place. So if you could give us some sort of an insight into how do they actually operate.
Yes, since the bread price fixing scandal was 15 years ago, I think companies are wary, but there's something that is more it's even worse than that, is that the fact that they monitor each other's prices. So there is this not deliberate manipulation, but there's market manipulation by industry on the whole. So if we look at the Competition Commission study on the rapid increase in sunflower oil, and the fact that from the producer price side, the price went up 70%, and in fact retailers had to absorb some of the increases. And you look at that, that the increases across the board, I'm sure they're not sitting together, but everybody's watching everybody's price. And the same happens still in the bread industry, the same happens in the flour business. All the producers are watching each other's price. If one makes a move, the other one goes. And they actually wait for a crisis to push up the price. And this is the kind of manipulation that we're seeing now. We saw that during COVID, and we're seeing it now with the Russia-Ukraine crisis and with some of the weather-inflicted crises. The moment there's an excuse to push up prices, the prices goes up exponentially. And then as the Competition Commission noted, it doesn't come down by the same percentage. So if you have this kind of manipulation in the market where prices are going up more than the input cost and not being reduced when input costs are reduced, the profit margins of these companies are going through the roof. And this is where we say, especially on basic foodstuff, there should be a cap on the kind of profit that companies are allowed to make on, for instance, maize meal, flour, bread, milk, and sunflower, basic essentials. There should be a cap on the profit. You cannot have these companies making excessive profits and the shareholders rejoicing, and the poor are suffering in the townships, going hungry, and it's just absolutely no sense of guilt on their part.
Well, certainly there isn't. And also, I think when one looks at the entire chain in terms of monitoring, the various processes, whether it's from the manufacturer's perspective right down through to the retailer and wholesalers as well, there seems to be a lack of monitoring mechanisms, for want of a better term, Imraahn.
No, most definitely. We don't have a competent state. We don't have a state that can enforce any kind of regulations. We see that with tax compliance. We see that with export, transfer pricing. We see a lot of this stuff happening. For instance, platinum goes out as tin and it's being priced at the price of tin instead of platinum. There's no regulation there. There's no the mining sector is a key example of how our country is being basically pillaged of its national resources. So again, we've got a very, very weak state in terms of enforcement, and then you've got this massive corruption at the same time. So you've got two types of crises. You've got massive corruption on the one side, and you've got weak enforcement. So obviously the capitalist monopolies and will exploit the weaknesses, and it's only the poor that pays the price for that.
Well, they've certainly exploited the weaknesses, and also when one looks at the government in itself, and of late, what we are seeing is all the government is interested in is generating revenue, and whether that is through VAT, whether it's a petrol levy, whether it's all the other forms of taxes, because what they've done is basically they've beefed up the revenue collection part. But when it comes to the spending side, obviously the governance and the structures and the checks and balances, all of that are extremely weak. So it appears as if this is the only thing that is of concern to the government is to collect revenue, and as long as as long as the money is coming in, they couldn't care about everything else that is taking place around the country, Imraahn.
Well, I would not credit them for being able to collect the money even. If you look at the amount of debt that our country has accrued over the past 10 years, and our debt ratio to our GDP, we are in a debt crisis. South Africa is in the top 10 most likely countries to fail in the next 5 years, according to some international studies. So we are on the brink of falling over the cliff, and again it will be the poor that suffers the brunt of that. And at the same time, we have all these factors coupled with climate change and some real climate impact and shocks coming our way, as we saw with the KZN floods and as we're seeing with the floods in Pakistan. So internationally, the world is in a state of crisis, and South Africa is very, very ill prepared to deal with the crises that are coming our way. And these are all issues that that needs to be highlighted in terms of looking at food prices. But it's a huge quagmire all around, and it is important that we as activists and as communities start realizing that there's no government coming back to save us. There's nobody that's going to be the salvation. Doesn't lie with the state or with big monopolies. It lies with people taking back power and taking sovereignty of their own spaces. And this is where we are working in our community, just trying a little bit of food gardening, trying a little bit of subsistence farming, encouraging alternatives, because we really have a situation where, as the poor in South Africa, that we can't rely on the government to solve the problems that we're faced with. And there's no political party that's actually able to give the kind of solutions that we need looking forward.
Well, I think, Imraahn, what you're saying is extremely true, because, the government is actually ill-equipped, I would say, to deal with any crisis situation. And the KZN flood was a classic example where until now, people still have not recovered to, and we see what had taken place in Tonga last week, the protest action as a result of running water not being restored. Now, that alone actually speaks volume in terms of the capacity of the government to even respond to a crisis like a flood.
Yeah, so we actually left to our own devices, and this is maybe a negative message, but there's a positivity in it, in terms of realizing that we need to really, as we've seen with some of our Muslim NGOs, it's really up to us to make the difference in creating the and turning the tide. But As far as expecting the ANC government right now, with them going to conference at the end of the year and the 2024 elections, and political parties and state intervention to make the difference, it's not going to happen. And the only other thing that's going that we're going to be faced with is, as I said earlier, there's no greater force than a hungry tummy. And when you look at the French Revolution and you look at everywhere in the world, Sri Lanka, and you look at Haiti, everywhere where people are in the kind of crisis that we are, it's a very ripe environment for a food-driven revolution.
Well, this has been the major concern, but also when one looks at the inability to act, and also, we spoke about the Competitions Commission and the time it actually takes for them to do their investigations and come up with their findings and finally hold those to account. But also, as Abeedah had mentioned, that these fines are actually factored in by those that are responsible for things like price gouging and the lot. And also, when it comes to these fines go back straight into government coffers. And who knows what government is actually doing with all this money coming back, even from the Competitions Commission.
Exactly. My point is that, we saw that with the brace price fixing, and we've seen it, with all the other fines. The Competition Commission is doing only one very good job, and that is highlighting and showing a finger at where the problem is. They're not solving the problem, but they're showing where the problem is, and the problem is in a market monopoly, capitalist system that is exploitative, and there is free reign to exploit without any fear of consequence. And this is where a strong message needs to be seen, that you cannot go on abusing it. The poor in South Africa is like an abused woman, if we talk gender-based violence language. You cannot continue abusing us as the poor and not expect consequences. And the consequences is going to be much worse than what we anticipate. And can I give you an example that happened in my community right now today, Brother Inayet? If you go to my Facebook page, you'll see it. Is that a youngster actually set a local shop right on fire.
Yes, and
building burnt. It's completely gutted. The whole complex is gutted. A young boy went into one of the aisles and deliberately started a fire. What the reason is, we don't know, but it's indicative of the kind of anger that is on the ground. And exciting to think what if we looked at KZN last year, we are on a tipping edge. If you look at what Operation Bedula is doing in throughout the country with xenophobia. The indicators are all that if food prices are going to escalate at the rate that it's going right now, and food is going to become even more unaffordable, we will be faced with mass insurrection.
Well, definitely. In fact, I've just gone basically onto your Facebook page just to get an idea, and it's actually horrific in terms of what we're actually seeing here, because this is huge, this is massive, and this is just one person. And I mean, can you imagine? Like you mentioned, we possibly could be ripe for a food revolution, and what the consequences would then be after having even witnessed what had taken place in KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng with all the shopping malls and with everything else that had basically gone down in flames, Imraahn.
And this is a powder keg we're sitting on, and we can debate, the excesses of the market and how they are exploiting us, and we can debate the failure of government. But the reality is that the the frustration on the ground will explode, and it's going to explode in the worst possible way.
Yes, Imran. Now, Imran, just I know we are
That it doesn't happen, yeah.
we are heading towards closure. In fact, we've got a few minutes left, and while the Competition Commission is actually doing its job, just looking at it from a consumer perspective and looking at what we can do at this point in time, what should we be doing?
Well, there's very little the consumers can do other than, raise their voices through programs such as yours and through media and through, but the most important thing is to monitor prices at the retailers and to really, hold these big companies accountable. But it's very difficult. It's a very difficult scenario where you have this lack of accountability. You really cannot hold the bosses of big companies and producers to account when they are profiteering, because it's seen as good business practice. It's a culture within big business to make massive profits. It's something that is accepted as normal. So how do we change that? How do we change that as a society? I really don't have the answers. As a consumer activist, I've been only highlighting the issues, but really finding the solutions means that we have to look at the systemic issues, and that means strong government intervention in the market, speaking to capping profits, speaking to, having strong consumer organizations. At the moment, South Africa doesn't have a single consumer lobby group that really speaks on bread and butter issues, except maybe for groups like Alta that speaks on tax, but there's nobody speaking on bread and butter issues right now. So
Yes, I think
in terms of in the middle class is a complacency, but they are also affected almost as much as the poor are.
exactly, and I think you hit the nail on the head, Imran, when you're talking about lobby group, because this was going to be my final question to you in terms of lobby groups, consumer lobby groups, and you cited Outa, for instance, as an example. But looking at business in itself, business has got strong lobby groups, and lobbying government. When we look at organizations like Business Unity South Africa, and there are many other organizations like that are talking to government all the time. And we don't have a strong consumer group that is talking and highlighting these issues, but more importantly, to make sure that government acts in the manner that they should be acting.
You see, we've been duped as consumers because what happened with the Consumer Protection Act, and then there was the National Consumer Tribunal, and there's the National Consumer Commission. So government had these paper tigers, say 7-8 years ago. They revamped the whole consumer regime and made us feel that they're listening to consumers. And that neutralized the consumer lobbies, because instead of consumer activists taking up issues, we had the Consumer Commission investigating and the Competition Commission investigating. But it turned out to be paper Consumer Commission side. It's basically been completely neutralized. We were the National Consumer Forum at the time, and we basically found it irrelevant for us to pick up consumer complaints if we have got a consumer commission that has a budget to do that. And as an NGO, we couldn't sustain ourselves anymore. But what happened is that this consumer commission, we've got the structures, we even got a consumer ombudsman now as well. All these consumer voices that government has put in place has just been put there to basically absorb the pressure, like the lid of a pressure cooker. And they're not there to listen to the real grievances of consumers on the ground. So it is time for us to mobilize a strong consumer lobby group. I wish I had the time and the energy to drive it, but unfortunately, my focus has changed inward into my own community and trying to make a difference where I am and not trying to change the world. So it is a situation where you can also only do so much. I'm not making excuses, but I'm saying that you can't fix everything that's there to be fixed, but you can at least fix in front of your own door, and that's what we're trying to do at the moment.
Well, Imraahn, keep up the good work. I know you're doing sterling work out in your part of the world. And also, I have been obviously following you on the various platforms and social media and highlighting a lot of these issues. And this is something that I think we all need to do in our own way and to try and see how we can actually be of benefit to others, how, no matter how small or how little or how insignificant it may seem, but it certainly makes a big difference. But for now, Imraahn, we thank you for taking time out. Shukran to you for your time with us this evening right here on Salam Media. And we definitely will be following developments, particularly with regard to the Competition Commission and the findings. And at some point in time, you and I will have another engagement on these matters that we have been talking about. But for now, all the best to you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Imraahn Mukaddam with us, and we also had Abeedah Adams with us earlier on. We need to apologize that Imraahn obviously had signal issues, so we couldn't get a video-based interview for the second half of the show. But we're going to go for a break. We come back, and we are now talking about Afghanistan. We're talking about the central bank, and we are talking about the assets. And we've now learned about victims who are not entitled to seize the central bank assets. We were going to be talking with Medea Benjamin, co-founder of women-led group, peace group, which is called Code Pink. But unfortunately, Medea can't join us, but will be joined by Hadia Afzal, and she is with an organization that runs, and it's called Unfreeze Afghanistan. So stay with us. We'll be back.